Hello, everybody. How are you? Sunday here in the northern part of Los Angeles area, Southern California, out at Lake Hughes, Staic area. And we're going to take the time on some highway miles here to talk about another community spotlight for the Los Angeles area. We're going to stay out in the east side there, east of downtown Los Angeles in the San Gabriel Valley, also known as the San Gabriel Valley. And we're going to talk about Hacienda Heights. Now, it's really kind of a fascinating community, Hacienda Heights. And, you know, it's interesting. The whole area out there, as much of California, but the continuing theme through the San Gabriel Valley was the mission and the life of the mission in tandem with the life on the ranchos. So often when you do the research on these communities, you'll see that a community, a town, a neighborhood was formerly a rancho that was operated in tandem with the mission. So the Spanish influence and farming and cattle and oil actually, but farming in particular, and the mission life goes back, you know, hundreds of years in LA and Southern California, and you could say California in general, but it's really fascinating. So the crops that were grown in Hacienda Heights were avocados, citrus, and walnuts. Those are the three big ones. And this lasted for a very long time. I mean, because if you've ever been here, and hopefully it wasn't on a day like today, but certainly if you live here, you know that statistically, Southern California gets 300 sunny days a year. And I forget how they actually measure what they would technically call it, sunny or not. But in comparison, Phoenix gets like 340 or 320, something like that. 340, I think. So, you know, we're not Phoenix, and we have weather like this during the Christmas season, January, and a little bit into February. But nonetheless, you could see where all of those orchards would have been very successful out there in the eastern area, east of LA, east of downtown LA anyway. Much like the citrus orchards in the valley. Well, when we just say the valley, people are referring to the San Fernando Valley. Those were all orchards out there. But what happened was there was two things that were affecting the orchards: the almonds, the citrus, and the walnuts. And that was, a lot of it was just pestilence, you know, pests. They just couldn't, I don't know if it wasn't that they didn't have, and this is where I need to look into it more. I don't know if it's because they didn't have the, you know, the pesticides that we have now. I'm sure they had some, but maybe not to the extent. And it just became unprofitable to run. They couldn't make any money on it. Diseases in the crops and pests. And a lot of times those are one and the same. You know, the pests cause diseases. All right. And so by the 1900s, it just didn't, by the Depression of the 1930s, it wasn't smart. You couldn't make any money, and so that change set up the next wave of the use of the land, which was for homes, to make them into bedroom communities, residential communities, And that was before the interstate. I think the interstates were built they started to be made in like the 40s, maybe. I don't think they had any interstates in that area quite yet, like this size. I'm sure they had highways. But the interstate, I mean, look, think about it. Look at how much space there is on this road right now in front of us. Think about it in like 1930, 1940 when they built an interstate like this. I mean, if you got on one for the first time and you're driving out to the east of LA, you're like, look at all this land, and it only open land to buy a home, build a home, buy a home, and it only took us what 20 minutes, whatever it was. So it's no wonder then that the bedroom communities took off and that the suburbs took off, just like that. And plus you could buy a home for, I don't know, $1,000, $5,000. You know what I mean? So a lot of this was covered in a very famous film called Withering Hacienda Heights. And in it, Henry Fonda and Gregory Peck play the main leads. And Henry Fonda plays a farmer who is trying to hold on out there in Hacienda Heights because he grew up when the avocados, the oranges, the other citruses, the walnuts were in full bloom and not a problem. No diseases, no pests, and it was an idyllic life. And yet, the changes take place that I just mentioned, the pests, the diseases, and here comes Gregory Peck around working for a big builder. He's the front man. He's got the charm, he's got the low-key style. He's trying to get in good with the landowners, because his goal is to buy their land and kick him off of it. And a lot of them go for it because they've had it, but Henry Fonda is hanging on. And Gregory Peck encounters him in a downtown Hacienda Heights cafe where, just like today on Sunday morning, that's where Henry Fonda would go every Sunday morning to get his coffee, to get a breakfast, to talk to the local townspeople, talk to the other farmers that they haven't seen for probably a long time. They're all out working the fields, managing their crops, supervising their teams. And Henry Fonda is sitting at a table reading the Hacienda Heights Times, and in comes Gregory Peck. It's a dramatic scene because Henry Fonda doesn't look up for what seems like 10 minutes, but it's probably just a few seconds. And he looks up, Gregory Peck is standing there, who hasn't said anything. Gregory Peck has not said anything. Henry Fonda doesn't lift his head, but he lifts his eyes. You know what I mean? His head is sort of angled toward the newspaper, and he just lifts up his eyes. Okay? And he goes, Mr. Green. And, he just says the guy's name. I mean, it's a really great scene. And Gregory Peck is standing there, and he hasn't said anything. I think he's trying to show that he's trying to pay respects. He's trying to show respects. Not pay respects, but show respect. And because that's his whole style, is to sneak in there by getting on your good side. And then they put the hammer down. He's sort of like the velvet of the velvet glove with the iron fist, right? And that's his job. And so Gregory Peck, he goes, Mr. Houston, right? And they're calling themselves by their formal names, which is another interesting twist to the script, right? Because it shows that there's and it was more common in those days to do that, right? Now we just call everybody by their first name. There's very few people. Although when I grew up, there was a transition there where, you would call, and you still, to a certain extent, you would call somebody Mr. Whoever, Mrs. Whoever. But for the most part, it's more casual. And although, as I grew up, there's a transition where you could make a mistake. You could call somebody older, like, okay, Ivan, and they're like, oh, I mean, Mr. Petrovsky or whatever, you know what I mean? And your father would say to your son, son, you got to show respect to certain adult, the whole like, okay. But today it's like, hey, Ivan, hey, bro, although they do say Mr. President. But I guess the president's one role that you would say Mr. whatever, Mrs. President. Would they say Mrs. Presidents? Ms. President? Well, how do they do that if they get a female president, which they should? But how do they address? Is it Ms. President? Ms. President? Mrs. President? No. Ms.? I don't know. Miss? No. Madam President. I like that one. Madam President? It's a good question. If you didn't know, these videos are all about side roads. I should have called these videos digressions. So Gregory Peck, addresses him, and then Henry Fonda takes a sip of his coffee and he says, very slowly, he says, suppose you want to talk about my property. And Gregory Peck says, if you have a moment, see how overly polite they're being? And Henry Fonda says, well, we could talk about it, but it would be a short conversation, and my answer would still be the same as I'm about to tell you right now. And he pauses, and he takes the sugar, and he pours some sugar in the coffee, and he starts stirring it. He doesn't say anything. And again, Mr. Gregory Peck says, which is, and Henry Fonda takes a spoon, he dings it on the side of the cup a couple times as if he's shaking off some sugar, which doesn't make any sense, getting those last drops off of the spoon, and then he sets it on the saucer, and he says, I'm going to sell my farm when you drag my dead body off of it. Now get out of here and scat! Like that. I mean, guys, it was one of the most dramatic. And Gregory Peck does not move. But he has his hat. In those days, they wore hats. He puts his hat on. And he says, now again, this is another classic script writing. An example of classic script writing. He goes, I'll put that down as a maybe. If you get a chance, I think it's on Netflix. Withering Hacienda Heights. Guys, it's the greatest. All right, well, that's another snapshot of a community in Los Angeles. This time it's Hacienda Heights. We're going to have a lot more videos on this community, as we will all of the LA area towns and neighborhoods that we've been talking about. So come on back for more.